Have you ever wondered if a box cake is actually quicker and easier than making one from scratch? I'm Marissa McDonald with Pacific Northwest Suburban Homesteading. Today, Shonna Zimmermann, Remote Homestead Accomplice, will put it to the test.
Instant cake mixes were invented in the 1930s. It was a time when society was shifting from more rural populations to more of an urban and suburban focus. More of a nuclear family and less of the extended family. About in the 1940s, when World War II broke out, there was a real shift in the way the family ran. Most of the men went off to fight, and women of the household went to work in the factories. That made it kind of difficult to still maintain a household, so that pretty much inspired the rise of convenience foods. It made it a lot easier for the effectively single mom to still work every day and come home and put a decent meal on the table. Now, the funny thing about cake mixes, I find this a very funny anecdote, is that they actually weren't very popular in the 1930s and 1940s because all they required was the cake mix and water. It felt like cheating. It really didn't feel like very involved baking. So in the 1950s, the recipes were changed to require eggs, and sales just soared. Then the people baking the cakes felt, oh, I'm actually involved in this process. I truly baked it. And a cake mix will make a perfectly adequate, mediocre cake. There's nothing really special about it. It's certainly not grandma's baked from scratch cake. The real convenience factor, as it says right there on the label, bowl to oven in minutes. All you need is cake mix, water, oil, and eggs. 4 ingredients for a cake that just tastes like nothing special.
I think it is worth noting here that nothing special is not really meant as a slam. If all you can or want to do is make a box cake, it is still a worthwhile project and you get cake at the end. What is meant is that a box cake is a good, generic, serviceable cake rather than some super secret chef concoction that makes the angels sing. I grew up eating box cake and prefer to make my own scratch cakes, but still have a fine appreciation for any cake that someone takes the time to make at home and share with me. Again, you still end up with cake, and a day with cake is better than one without.
Fast forward several decades, but still back in the time of the dinosaurs when I was in high school, we actually had a class called Home Economics. They taught us how to cook, how to sew, all these things that are essential for running a household. And one of the things that always struck me is our teacher taught us how to use cake mix, but make it taste more homemade. Make it taste from scratch. What she told us was you follow the instructions, you have your cake mix, water, oil, and eggs, but instead of water, you take half of the water and add milk. You add a teaspoon of cream of tartar. I still don't know what cream of tartar is, but I sure hope it's not what it sounds like. 2 tablespoons of cornstarch and a teaspoon of vanilla, and you mix that all into the batter.
Cream of tartar, or tartaric acid, is a fine white powder made from the crystals generated during winemaking as a part of the fermentation process. This naturally occurring acid, also known as potassium bitartrate or potassium hydrogen tartrate, is commonly used in baking because it is similar to vinegar or citrus. It is a leavening agent to help baked goods rise and stabilizes things like whipped cream and egg whites.
Tastes better, but aren't we losing our convenience? That's now, instead of 4 ingredients, that's 8. Let's compare it to a chocolate cake recipe from scratch. Sugar, flour, cocoa powder, baking soda, salt, optional instant coffee powder, eggs, milk, oil, vanilla, and water. That's 11 ingredients, 12 if you use the optional one.
The recipe from the vintage chocolate Wacky cake recipe video only has 9 ingredients.
So is this really saving me any time? Seems like this would just take a few minutes more to get those ingredients. You bake it for 35 minutes. You bake it for 30 to 35 minutes. Are we really saving anything using a cake mix? Or is it just as convenient to make it by scratch? Well, there's only one way to find out. So let's start our little experiment. First, we're going to establish our control, which is finding out how quick, easy, and convenient it is to make a chocolate cake from a mix. Now, just to clarify, for this experiment, we are only focusing on the baking of the cake. We're not going to be doing any decorating. We're just wanting to know from the first time that the ingredients go into this bowl till it comes out of the oven, how long and how easy it is to bake this cake. For that, I have done a couple things in advance. I have prepared my pans with a little bit of butter and flour. First, I'm preparing the pan by coating the bottom and the sides with butter or shortening or oil, just something that's got good greasy content to it. Once it's greased well, you just lightly coat everything with a good dusting of flour. Shake it around a bit to cover it. Get up the sides a little bit. And then dump out any extra. Another way of preparing a pan would be to cut a piece of parchment paper that would fit in the bottom of this and put it down with a very light coating of oil just to keep it stuck down, and that will act as a nonstick surface that will pop right out of the pan. Either way is fine. However you want to prepare your baking pans is great. I did that ahead of time because that's exactly the same whether you bake a cake from a mix or whether you bake it from scratch. For the purposes of this video, we're just going to do that ahead of time and not focus on that. I've also preheated my oven. It's the same thing for whether you're doing from a mix or from scratch. Preheated it to 350. What I'm not doing is prepping my ingredients ahead of time. I'm going to be doing this just like I'm a normal cook in a normal kitchen, frantically going through my cabinets trying to remember what I did with cooking oil, because that's all part of being a real cook at home. Let's get started. First thing you're always going to want to do, aside from washing your hands and tying your hair back, is get familiar with your ingredients. So just read over your recipe. I'm going to be doing exactly what the box tells me to do. I say that because there are certain tips that I have learned about baking, and I'm not talking about the things that you have to do to make the box cake taste like homemade. I'm talking about the fact that I have the knowledge that you really want to bake using eggs that have been out of the refrigerator and come to room temperature. They just emulsify better and whip better, give you a lighter texture. It does not say to use room temperature eggs on this box, so I'm not going to be doing that. I'm going to start a timer. Let's see how long this takes. Put your cake mix in a bowl. Add 1 1/4 cups of water. ½ cup vegetable oil. And 3 eggs. While I'm doing this, just want to point out that I crack my eggs into a separate container. Every once in a while, you might get one that's not so good and you don't want to put it directly in your mix. Ruin the whole thing. 2. 3 eggs. Mix in a large bowl with a mixer on medium speed or beat vigorously by hand for 2 minutes. All right, that was 2 minutes. And as you can see, you've got fairly smooth batter with lots of air bubbles. Pour into your pans. These are 9-inch cake pans, and you probably saw that I was moving the beater around quite a bit and scraping the sides. You don't want to hold it just in the center of your mixing bowl. You won't get everything mixed in quite as well. So I'm pouring it as evenly as possible into the 2 pans. Helps to spread it around just a little bit, but it is pretty self-leveling and it will even out in the oven. So that says bake 9-inch round pans for 25 to 30 minutes. When it says bake 25 to 30 minutes, always start with a lower number. The lesson I learned, kind of learned the hard way, is that if you're baking something and you haven't baked it long enough, you can always add more time. But if you've baked it too long, you can't take the time off. I know for a fact that this oven is what's called a slow oven. If I were to actually put a thermometer in there and set it to what the readout says is 350 degrees, it probably isn't reaching that 350 degrees. It is probably reaching about 320 to maybe 330. So I know that it's going to take longer to bake this cake. I would personally have adapted for that just because of my familiarity with the oven, but I'm doing this by the book to keep everything as equal as possible. I'd like to address an old belief that a loud noise while a cake was baking could make the cake fall. Now, a fallen cake is when you've taken it out of the oven and it's very light and fluffy, and then as it cools, it just collapses into this dense thing. That happens when air bubbles that are in the dough start breaking and they just can't hold up the structure of the cake anymore. People used to think that a loud noise made the bubbles pop. That's not true. Usually it happens because either you haven't baked it long enough, and so the cake inside is still wet, and structurally the bubbles just cannot exist. They start popping like soap bubbles. The other thing that happens to cause a cake to fall is if you have opened and closed the oven many, many times, if you're trying to test it to see if it's done, and you've done it so many times that you've actually changed the internal temperature of the oven. Again, that will cause it to not bake correctly and it will fall. So the cake has now officially been in the oven for the amount of time that was specified on the box. You test it for doneness with a little skewer. You just stick it somewhere close to the middle of the cake, and if the skewer or toothpick comes out with raw batter still sticking to it, it's going to need more time to bake. I don't know if you can see this. This has a little bit of batter still on it. I'm going to give it about 5 more minutes. And just add your time in 5-minute increments and check it. It shouldn't take too much longer than what is specified on the box or in the recipe. Cake's almost ready, so I'm just going to set out my cooling racks. And when it comes out of the oven, don't take it immediately out of the pan. Give it about 10 minutes to cool down. 10 minutes will give it enough time that it won't crack and fall apart on you. It'll hold together a lot better if you just give it a few minutes to rest after it comes out of the oven. Here we go. That's done. So as I said, these are going to rest for about 10 minutes before I take them out of the pan. But from the moment that the ingredients started going into the pan to the time they came out and started cooling, 39 minutes and 36 seconds. So now that we've established it takes about 40 minutes from boxed cake to completed product, let's see what happens if we bake one from scratch. I have a very simple chocolate cake recipe here, and we're going to be dropping it in the comments if you want to follow it yourself and see the results you get. First thing you do when you have any recipe is read the whole thing over, make sure that you have all the ingredients, and make sure that you're familiar with all the terms and directions. So sugar, flour, cocoa powder, baking soda, salt, optional instant coffee. I'd like to point this out. 2 eggs, room temperature. So I have had these sitting out to come to room temperature. The boxed cake did not instruct that. 1 cup whole or 2% milk, 1/2 cup vegetable oil, 2 teaspoons vanilla extract, and 1 cup boiling water. So that last ingredient, boiling water, when I start this timer, the first thing I'm going to do is start the water boiling so it will be ready when I need it and we don't have to wait for it. I will also note that this recipe does not say to sift the flour. I would do that just on my knowledge of sifting flour, but I'm going to be following the instructions exactly and precisely, and it does not say to sift it.
Why does sifting matter? It can remove any lumps or solid impurities, but with modern store-bought flour, sifting largely affects volume. Unless you are measuring your ingredients on a scale, you most likely are using a volume measure. The amount in a scoop varies depending on how settled and compacted your flour is in its container. The fluffier and more full of air, the less actual flour is in your measure. Sifting your flour ahead of time means a more consistent amount. Most of the time it doesn't matter, but if a recipe says to sift, you should.
It also, as I mentioned, says all-purpose flour. You'll also know that there's other things out there called cake flour, self-rising flour. Be sure that you've got what the recipe is specifying. Other than that, I have done exactly what I did for the boxed cake mix. I have greased and floured my pans so they are prepared. I have preheated the oven. And as I mentioned, I did bring the eggs up to room temperature, but other than that, I'm going to be doing this with no pre-staged ingredients, just going as they are in my kitchen. Let's start the timer and go. I'm going to start the water boiling. Two cups granulated sugar. Always level your dry ingredients. And the directions in this recipe say that I'm mixing all the dry ingredients together first and then adding the wet ingredients. 2 cups sugar, 1 3/4 cup flour. And again, as I said, I'm not sifting this because the directions do not tell me to do that. 1. I have a really awesome measuring set. It actually has 2/3 cup and 3/4 cup. You don't always see those. I'm really happy with this. Usually they're just in cup, 1/2 cup, 1/3 cup, and 1/4 cup increments. 1 3/4 cups flour, 3/4 cup unsweetened cocoa powder. Now, if your measuring spoon is too big to fit into the container, just scoop it in with a smaller one. Make a slight mess because if your counter and your cookbooks don't taste as good as a recipe, what are you even doing? Cocoa powder, 1 1/2 teaspoons baking powder, and 1 1/2 teaspoons baking soda. They are 2 different things. One does not necessarily substitute for the other. Baking soda is just bicarbonate of soda. Baking powder has other ingredients in it. What was I doing? 1.5 teaspoons. 1.5 teaspoons is also half a tablespoon. There's 3 teaspoons in a tablespoon. So if you happen to have a half tablespoon measurement, you can use that. Baking powder. Baking soda boxes are great. You can level off using the top of the lid. There we go. Baking soda, 3/4 teaspoon of salt. Generally that means plain table salt. What did I say? 3/4 teaspoon. I don't think I have a 3/4 teaspoon, so I'm going to do a half plus a quarter. Two teaspoons instant coffee powder, optional. I am going to do it because I believe it enhances the chocolate taste very nicely. 2 teaspoons. 1, 2. Those are all the dry ingredients. I'm just going to whisk those dry ingredients together real quickly. And you can actually use your beater for this, just on low. There we go. Now it's asking for 2 large eggs, room temperature. Again, as I stated last time, I prefer to crack them into a different vessel, so just in case something's wrong with the egg, it's rotten or something, it doesn't go into my hard work making up this mix already. All right, 2 eggs, room temperature. One cup whole or 2% milk. Half a pint. A pint is 2 cups, therefore a half a pint is 1 cup. I'm just going to put this whole thing in there. One half cup vegetable oil. For this, you're going to want to use corn oil, canola oil, vegetable oil. Don't use olive oil. That's more for salads and sauteing rather than baking. Also, when you're doing oil, be sure to use a liquid measuring cup versus a dry goods measuring cup. They are different measurements. All right, half a cup of vegetable oil. Can't see the half cup line. There it is. Half a cup of vegetable oil. 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. I don't necessarily recommend measuring over your mixing bowl just in case you spill, but I've never had a cake that suffered from having a little extra vanilla in it. All right, this says to beat at medium speed for 2 minutes with an electric mixer before we put the boiling water in. Okay, 2 minutes. Nice, well emulsified batter. And now it says to stir in the boiling water. The batter will be thin. That means we're going to put the boiling water in and just mix it with the mixer just enough to make sure it's all incorporated. Boiling hot water. As the recipe promised, the batter is thin. We're going to divide it up between these two prepared pans. All right, that looks fairly even. Into the oven they go for 30 to 35 minutes at 350 degrees. Again, as I said before, I'm going to start at the lower amount of time, and if I need to add more, I will add it. While that's baking, I'm going to clean up this mess. As tempting as it is, we've mentioned this before. Don't eat raw cake batter. In addition to the possibility of salmonella being in the eggs, they've discovered that raw flour can actually carry E. coli bacteria. So just don't do it. As before, we test the cake's doneness with a skewer in the middle. That appears to be done. The recipe says cool for 10 minutes before moving to a wire wrap. And again, as I said, my counters are heat resistant, so don't worry about that. And 49 minutes and 6 seconds. So it took me almost exactly 10 minutes more to bake a cake from scratch. But the real test, how do they taste? So now it's time for a taste test. Now, despite saying that I wasn't going to do this as part of the time trial, I did end up decorating both cakes. Mostly it was to make sure that I could tell them apart. Now, the first thing I'll notice is that this one here, which is the instant box mix, when it baked, it domed up a little more. The scratch cake was a little more flat on top. Most decorators, when they want to work with a cake, they will flatten it. They prefer a flat one, but that's not a problem. If it does dome up on you, you just get a knife and just cut it horizontally to make a nice flat surface. I will also say that the scratch cake seemed to be a little taller in the pan when it was done. I don't know if that was because it baked up fluffier or if there was just more batter in the pan. So let's try it. First thing I'm going to do is try the boxed cake. I'm going to do my best to eat around the frosting because I really just want to taste the cake that I baked. The boxed cake first. It's not bad. Kind of chocolatey. It's kind of moist. It's got a fairly good, slightly fluffy texture. It's not bad. If somebody were to bake a cake and give this to me, I would appreciate it. And this is the cake from scratch. Cleanse the palate. Well, let's give it a try. This definitely has a denser texture, still quite moist. The chocolate flavor is a little stronger, which is probably to do with the instant coffee that's in it. I like the texture a little better, but that's just me. It's really good. I'm gonna go back to the box cake now. In comparison, this has a very slight, almost metallic taste to it that I didn't notice until I had the cake that was from scratch and came back to this. Yeah, this has a flavor almost like toast. Not quite toast, but it's along that family of the smoky. I don't even want to say burnt. Burnt is not the right word, but it has a slightly toasted quality to it. And one more try of the box. Okay, I'm not really sampling at this point. I'm just having an excuse to eat more cake. Yeah, there is something that doesn't quite have as much richness to it. And there's just this, like I said, just very, very slight metallic taste to it. But again, I didn't notice it until I had the scratch cake in comparison. So honestly, as I said, if somebody were to bake a cake from a box mix for me and give it to me, I would accept it. It's a good cake. And there are reasons why you might want to do a cake from a mix. For instance, I have a very well-stocked kitchen, but if you don't do a lot of baking, you might not have flour and sugar and baking soda and baking powder and all these things on hand. And that would actually be very expensive to buy all of those things for just one cake. I'm not saying that scratch cake is so much better than a box cake mix. No, I'm not saying that. But I am pointing out that it took only about 10 minutes more to bake a cake from scratch, which I think tastes better. What I'm saying is that if you've never baked a cake from scratch and the only reason that you're not doing it is because baking, as I said, from scratch just seems overwhelming and intimidating and time consuming, it really isn't. So give it a try. Let us know how it turns out.
Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Until next time, be curious, keep an open mind, and never stop learning.